Hi, I'm Jennifer Jean. Today I'm going to be talking about the deservedly famous poem, We Real Cool by Gwendolyn Brooks. To see my other poetry community videos, subscribe to my Patreon page. This week's content includes discussions of poetry collection blurbs and introductions, as well as a discussion of my own poem, The Doors of Perception, which appeared in the October 2020 issue of Poetry Magazine. We Real Cool actually appeared in the September 1959 issue of Poetry Magazine, as well as in Brooks' collection, The Bean Eaters. Brooks was known to be good-naturedly annoyed by the constant anthologizing of this poem, so I was actually hesitant to discuss it, especially when her poem, The Lovers of the Poor, is a particular favorite of mine. But I felt that her crafting genius in We Real Cool bears more discussion than people usually give it. People usually focus on the potent content, the references to the 7 deadly sins, etc., which is fine, but perhaps we here can get at some of the other hidden elements of this important, great poem. Typically at this point, I read the poem aloud before I analyze it, but today let's hear Brooks herself read it. Her reading style actually plays into some of the things I want to talk about. So I'm going to now share a screen with the Poetry Foundation website's picture of her poem and a recording of her poem. Okay, on the right side of the screen, you can see a picture of that Poetry Magazine issue from September 1959, which totally has me salivating. If you could look really close at it, the writing's very small, but you can see that in addition to Gwendolyn Brooks, we have Sylvia Plath with a poem in there. I don't know which poem. I'd like to check that out. And yeah, some of these other folks, I actually don't recognize the other folks, but I would love to see what was going on in poetry at that time. It'd be really exciting. Okay, so let's listen to Gwendolyn Brooks.
We real cool. The pool players, 7 at the Golden Shovel. We real cool. We left school. We flirt late. We strike straight. We sing sin. We thin gin. We jazz June. We die soon.
Fantastic. So that's actually a different sort of reading than the one that I heard for years on a friend's phone. She had it as, I don't know if it was her ringtone or her text tone. It was something where suddenly I'd be in conversation with this friend of mine who is poet January O'Neill, and we'd be talking, and then suddenly, we real cool would suddenly come up, and it would be Gwendolyn Brooks' poem read even more dynamically than that was read. That was a very fantastic reading, but the one I wish I could have found the one that the recording that January uses, because it really emphasizes the we, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. So right now I'm going to just share a screen of my notations, my extensive notations on this poem. So this is a little preview of some of the comments that I'll be talking about. But before I get into those notations, if you're watching on YouTube, please take time now to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell below. In the description section of this video, you can find links to my Patreon, Twitter, Instagram, and website. On Instagram, you can find links to all of these things in my bio. All of my exclusive poetry and community, creative community related content is available to patrons on my Patreon page and will soon be available as well on my locals page. Okay, let's get started. So we're back looking at the notated page. So first off, I have a little note here about the epigraph. Okay, so for a long time, I heard this poem, like for decades. Well, that doesn't exactly give my age away to say decades, I suppose. But anyways, for decades, I heard this poem, and I never heard anyone read or refer to even the epigraph that she has here. And I'm not sure if it's a subtitle, a subheading of some kind, or if it is in fact an epigraph. I decided to treat it as an epigraph because I can't find any indication of what it could be otherwise. If you have an idea, put a notation in the chat below on the YouTube page, or if you're watching this on my Patreon, then put a little notation there. What could this be? I think it is a rather unusual epigraph because it looks as if it's part of the poem. And I actually wondered if it was even the title. That's another consideration. If anyone has any idea of whether this was the original title, and then people just started calling the poem We Real Cool, because sometimes that happens with the titles of many things. I'm a big Star Wars fan, and the official title of the first movie, I believe, was just Star Wars. And then as things changed, it was called A New Hope, Star Wars A New Hope, or just A New Hope. And the actual title, whatever that happened to be, got a little bit blurred. And there are many other, that's not even the best example of something where it has a very significant line to it, or something that stands out about it, and people call it that, but it isn't the actual title. So I don't know if she just decided to go ahead with We Real Cool because that's what everybody was calling it, because she mentioned in many interviews that this poem was constantly requested for her to read at readings, and so she would just announce that she was going to do it at a certain point in most of her readings. So I put here, so again, I just, as it's published now, and in my copy, which my copy of her selected poems, it's published like this as well, with this epigraph looking element there. So it doesn't look like a title at all. I'd have to look at my copy of Bean Eaters. I could not find it. I have thousands of books, so I actually had trouble, but I found my selected, which I'll talk a little bit about. There's something special in that. In my selected copy that I'll talk about at the end of this video. But in any case, so I'm treating this as an epigraph. And for those that don't know, an epigraph is just a little bit of non-poem information that the poet includes right under the title usually. I have seen it above the title and below the poem. Maybe there's an asterisk somewhere by the title or somewhere in the poem, and then there's some notation of factual information that the poet felt that the reader needed to know before they read the poem, to give it context. That's the purpose. And sometimes there are arguments about whether a poet should or shouldn't include an epigraph when they put out a poem. The whole idea of, should a poem stand on its own without this extra information, this factual interruption? Sometimes it is quite an interruption. I didn't feel like this was an interruption at all. And the way she reads it, it's not an interruption. In fact, it sounds a bit, somewhat like part of the poem, but it can't be. This poem is so tight that those two rather musical lines, especially as Brooks read them, do not fit the very tight pattern of this poem. So it can't be. So it has to be relegated to maybe this in-between status, but I'm calling it an epigraph. So in calling it an epigraph, all that is to get to the point of this question that I put up here at the top. What happens when the epigraph is removed? This particular epigraph is removed. It's just We Real Cool, and then We Real Cool, we left school, and then going on. There's a bit of history that disappears. And so I thought of it more as history than context. Context is, I don't know. I'm trying to think of a very good historical poem example that has a epigraph, and I can't. I know when I write poems, I am trying to get rid of the epigraph as much as possible. And usually I only include it if it's absolutely necessary. So I recently had a book accepted for publication. It's Object Lesson. It's about human trafficking survivors and those kinds of issues. And some of those poems are persona poems. And so there's factual information that I actually want the reader to know about, or my audience, if they're listening, to know about, to put the poem in context, because I just want to launch in. I'm an in medias res kind of poet, or I try to be. I really like launching in the middle of a situation, especially if it's a persona poem, just launching and not doing a lot of explication. So sometimes that epigraph is needed, and I include it if I have to. I don't feel like she's giving us context necessarily. I feel like she's giving us history. And because of the way that it's phrased, the pool players, it's in all caps. Most epigraphs are not in caps. That's why this is sort of this in-between title and epigraph and poem aspect. The poem aspect is the musicality, as I said. The pool players, 7 at the golden shovel. So again, all caps there. So, and that sounds rather epic. It doesn't just sound like, on the day that I saw some pool players, playing pool, or some young men playing pool at a place called the Golden Shovel. I don't know, place is not very poetic, but anyways, it's not just the way usual epigraphs are, which are just informational and cold facts to give context. This feels more like historical, like epic, like these are the pool players. So not just pool players or some pool players, they are the pool players. Feels historical. And 7 at the Golden Shovel. Golden Shovel sounds really like an epic place as well, especially as she reads it. I was thinking of the 7 Samurai. I don't think she was thinking of the 7 Samurai or anything like that. And as I mentioned earlier, people look at this as this, some references to the 7 deadly sins. So 7 at the Golden Shovel, that's its own sentence, little fragment sentence there. Maybe 7 deadly sins at the Golden Shovel, possibly. I don't know, because I didn't read this poem with that 7 deadly sins thing in mind, and I didn't want to go into that too much. So yeah, this feels more epic, which I guess is not the same as history. But I think she's also talking specifically, and this is the content most people go into, that these are young African-American men in the 1950s, and they're, since school is mentioned in the second line, apparently they should be at school, but they're not, and this is their life, as a group. And I'm going to go into that group aspect in a second. But I just want to mention, I put here, specificity adds depth. So if we just read, so let's take out this epigraph or whatever it is, we real cool, and then we real cool, the title, and then going back to we real cool, we left school. That could be anybody. That could just be anyone, which is fine. A lot of poets want to write like that. Gwendolyn Brooks was not writing like that. She was writing from a very particular history and time. She was very much a documentary poet, I would say, and documenting places and her era and her people, the African Americans at that time, and the things that she noticed in her neighborhood. I'm just looking through her this selected book. So one of her most beloved books is A Street in Bronzeville. Just that title alone tells us that she's documenting a very particular place, and she does in that book. And even the Bean Eaters, it sounds like the pool players. Like, these are very specific people. It isn't general. So she doesn't write like that. She's a very detailed poet. That's what I appreciate about her work the most, the detail. This poem does not have so much detail, actually. It's not really, not very specific, not as specific as what we find in that epigraph, okay? And so it becomes a part of the rest of her oeuvre, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, probably not. But anyways, it does, because she has that epigraph there. And we know, okay, this is a Gwendolyn Brooks poem. And that's important also because she doesn't tend to write poems like this. She doesn't tend to write short poems, first of all. She has some. This is one of her shortest. And it's not the only one, as I said, but her poems tend to be long and epic, actually. So that epic aspect that I'm picking up, I think it might come from the fact that I read it recently, and I've always read it in her selected, because as I said, I can't find her version of the Bean Eaters that I have hidden somewhere in my thousands of books. But in any case, she writes these epics. In fact, she wrote an epic, the Aeneid, which she based on the Ennead, which I'm probably also butchering that pronunciation. It's an epic, Greek epic. So she writes like that. She has that epic view. And she mixes it with the specificity, more specificity than any epic usually has, actually. So that's part of her genius, I think. And it also, the specificity, as always with all poems, adds a sense of depth. So we know who the we is right away. We real cool. Okay, I'm going to tell you who the we is. It's the pool players, these epic people in this very specific place in time. The 7, and there's a certain number of them. So it's not everybody. It's not all of us throughout time, actually. It's these people at this time, these pool players, these 7 pool players, not even all pool players. And they're at a specific place in a specific city. I believe it was Chicago, the Golden Shovel. So that was a lot to get into just about that little that little section there, but I think that that's important. The way a poet begins a poem is super important, and that's advice for all of you young writers out there. You always want to think carefully about how you set things up. Are you giving too much away? Are you not telling enough? Okay, let's go to this next section here. I'm just going to scroll. Okay, so use of cool, I'm just reading my little note here. Use of cool as slang in the first line plus school in the second line indicates a group persona. And I actually put group in parentheses because there's a layer element going on here. There is one voice. So persona, it has an individual sound to it actually, even though there's the we. Okay, it's a persona, but it's a group persona. That she's putting on because she's not one of the seven. So this is a persona poem essentially. And the slang, cool, is showing that, at least at that time, and she's spoken about that, she spoke about, and I don't think I have a note about this, so I can bring it up now, how using the word cool and using the word jazz for her was unusual. She doesn't usually write like that in her epics. And so she was putting on she was using the diction of the seven pool players that she was personifying in the poem. The persona of the pool players comes through very clearly right away in that first line. Okay, so that's something to note. And I think that's real genius that she just laid it out right there. So we got that. Going back to that epigraph, I think I'm obsessed with it. We got that specificity of who we're talking about, and so we know who the we is, and now we know something even more about the we, especially because they use the word cool, and it's not something this older woman, married woman, who doesn't live in this lifestyle that these young men are living, doesn't go to the Golden Shovel. She just peeked in. She's taking on that aspect. That's important to note. Okay. So next we have here, every line except the first has a verb. Okay. It's implied in the first. So I put that in parentheses because I realized she left out, because she's using that diction of the pool players. So she left out the are, A-R-E. We are real cool. These young men are not going to be talking like that with the full, and also the poem would just sink if that was the case. So we have a pattern here. We have every sentence begins with we. Every sentence is a bit of a fragment. Well, I wouldn't say that. Not all of them are. We left school. That's not really a fragment. But anyways, it has a fragmentary feel. There are 3 words in each sentence. Each sentence has each word in that 3-word sentence is a single syllable word. And all of them, except for that first line, that first sentence there, fragment sentence, has a verb. So that's all those, the pattern is so tight and strong, okay? It gives us some predictability, and as I'm going to talk about later, creates a musicality going on here, which is important with the word jazz. Again, I'll bring that up later. But what's really important when you have a verb in every single sentence, which not every poem does, and in the only one that doesn't, the verb is there, it's just implied. You have a strong poem. That's the top of the list for kinds of things for poets to use in a poem. If we rank the words, I don't know who said it. I just remember being in grad school and hearing my teacher talk about ranking things that you can use. Verbs are number 1. Next, nouns. Next, I don't know what would be next after nouns. Maybe it's adjectives are before adverbs, but they're like way below. When you have verbs and nouns, those are at the highest. Even pronouns, the we, I would say that's next after nouns. So we got the top 3 there. And then falling way below, we don't even have any of those, I think. Sing, thin, yeah. Even the things that could be adjectives are actually verbs. Maybe. No, I'm looking at it. I'm reading it through. I don't even think there's any adjectives, but it gives like an agitative, that's not a word, the agitative sense. When you say we jazz June, it's almost, and jazz June is on its own. I don't have this in my notes. I'm jumping ahead. I feel like it's okay. It's sort of a descriptor. Jazz is a descriptor for June. It's like an adjective there, even though it's meant to be a verb. It's what we do in June is a jazz thing, whatever that is. So yeah, there's she's using only, my point is, she's using the most important parts of the English language. You know, the verbs, the nouns, the pronouns, and then we don't even get the adverbs and the adjective, or adjectives and adverbs, put them in order, that can, people think can weaken a poem. I don't think it always weakens a poem. I think you just got to know when to use it and use it in the exact right place. All right. So if you hear my other videos, you'll hear me say that a lot. Okay, so every line has a verb, etc. So I'm only on my second point here. So this group persona, again, I put it in parentheses because they really feel strong as one. That's why I put group in parentheses. Group persona claims dynamic and agency. That was my sense. Like, we are in charge of our destiny is what it sounds like through most of the poem. And I'll get to where it stops. But it's an affirmation. We real cool. Like, this is a fact. It's in present tense. Oh, yeah, everything's in present tense, by the way, as if it could all be happening at once. Just for seeing them, it's like the message that their pool playing and their presence gives her is this present tense. Didn't even have that on my note. Present tense is always more urgent and powerful than past tense. I don't know about future tense. Most people don't write in future tense. The speculative, yeah, speculative isn't as powerful. I actually really love speculative poems, but for urgency, really present tense is the thing. And she has that. We are all these things all at once. It's very dynamic, you know, because of all the verbs. And it feels like agency, like they're claiming it. They're affirming all these things. This is what we do. This is what we are. And we are what we do is what it sounds like as well. Okay, so I'm going to go along here. Single syllable words seem chosen to emphasize, and then I have in parentheses, and allow for elongation of vowel sounds. Okay, so I have another thing about the alliteration, but let's do that. Let's look at that. So based on how she read her poem, and I still have in my mind January O'Neill's recording of the poem. So I'm probably going to emphasize it more than the Poetry Foundation recording. And there's probably a ton of recordings. I know there's one at the Library of Congress also, a very long interview and recording of her work, which is fabulous. You should check that out. It's from the early 60s. But in that, I'm going to call it the January O'Neill recording, she really elongates a lot of her vowels. Like, we real cool. We left school. We lurk late. We strike straight. We sing sin. We thin gin. We jazz June. We die soon. So even as I was reading, and this is always important when you're analyzing a poem, read it aloud and listen to how the poet, if you can do that, read it aloud. I mean, there are some really old recordings of poets on, like, they recorded it on wax, you know, like from the late 1800s. So you can find recordings of famous poets and poems. So do that. And then, of course, read it aloud yourself and check out what they're trying to do here. I do that a lot with Emily Dickinson, try to get at what she's trying to do. But in any case, here, the elongation happens with that second word in each sentence, which is always the verb. I noticed it was difficult for me to elongate the vowel in die in the final line. We die soon. Yeah, it just didn't work. We die soon. It just, for me, and I would have to listen to the January O'Neill recording to see if it came out, but it's very interesting. There's you know, a mirroring of form, you know, what word was chosen, even though it's the exact right word, you know, to say, you know, what other word are you going to use for die? It's perfect. It's what makes this poem so perfect, actually, and genius. Die is the exact right word. because of what it means, but also because it's you cannot elongate the vowel sound in the middle. It has a vowel, it has two vowels actually, and it's very difficult verbally to do that. And it indicates what's coming next, which is, I've jumped ahead to this little note down here. We is gone. There's no we. We die soon. And then it's done. There's no more we after that. There wouldn't be. Logically, it wouldn't happen. But also what's interesting is formally it didn't happen. And so we get that sense of death, of gone. The group is gone, and there's not even an individual left. When the group is gone, the individual is gone. That's really interesting to me. I think she's making a very strong statement with that. So I put down here coupled with alliteration. So there's a lot of alliteration here too. It's not as consistent, although you have real, cool, left, school. So we have a lot of L's, lurk, late. We've got a bunch of L's right there in those first three lines. But by alliteration, I'm thinking more words that have the same consonant sound, of course. But in this case, I'm mostly referring to the ones that follow each other. So lurkulate, strike straight, we have stra, sing, sin, jazz, June. And then we don't have die soon does not match it, thin gin does not, the and we get a lot of N's in that couplet there, the sing and sin and thin and gin, and even later we get a little June. So she's just picking the best words. English language is just right there for her, and she just said yes to it. That's what I think happened. So my last note here, it's not my last note, actually, my last note on the side here. The poem aloud sings because of all these lyrical elements, the alliteration and the assonance that's going on. Actually, she doesn't have so much assonance. It's mostly the elongation of the vowel sounds, the ability for the vowels to be elongated, the vowels that she chose, in the words that she chose, I should say. It's in the singing emulates specifically the bebop of jazz. That's something that people have talked about a lot. But I just wanted to put that in there because I emphasized sounds. And then I have here this thing, this parallel, see this double line? I put form, and then there's a double line, vertical line, content. That's from my memory of math, which is horrible. But I know what that means. Do you guys remember what that means? It means parallel. So form is parallel to content. It's almost like they're looking at each other in a mirror. Maybe kind of like Lucille Ball looking at Harpo, if you've ever seen that old episode where she's dressed like Harpo. And I think she's trying to fake him out that it's a mirror and she's not really there, and she just copies everything he's doing. I don't know how great that analogy is. Anyways, look at that old Lucille Ball episode. It's on YouTube. And you might get a sense of what I'm trying to say. But yeah, form and content can work together like that, where it's almost a mirror. It's parallel. It's not exact. Or, it's a marriage where, the two people are not exact, but they get along, and hopefully if it's a happy marriage, they're really getting along together and they work in conjunction, in unity. Okay. So down here, I have three last points here. Okay, so my favorite thing in the world, if you've been listening to these videos, is enjambment. I love enjambment. I'm a weirdo, poetry nerd. Okay, it's genius here. So I put here specific jazzy musicality is conveyed when the poem is spoken, and group persona is emphasized and powerful. So this is the obvious thing that everybody mentions. They always say, well, she has a pattern. I've never heard it mentioned that the pattern is about enjambment and how it's a testament to enjambment, this poem, and even how she says it. She cuts it off really quick. And in the January O'Neill recording, she really cuts it off. She says, we real cool. We left school. We lurk late, really emphasizing it. In the Poetry Foundation version, you do still hear it. So take a look at that. Or take another hearing at that if you want to really get at it. That's enjambment. That's the power of chopping in the middle of a clause or sentence, which is what she has done in every case, except for that first fragment. It's another exception there. Nothing's chopped. But we get two we's, so it doesn't matter if it's not chopped. We have two we's in there. The we is dominant. The group rules here. That's important. We get the personality of the group persona. So yeah, so we know we is important. That's why you use enjambment. And also the verbs that I had gone on about earlier are also emphasized because they're at the beginning of each of the other lines, except for that first line. Left, lurk, strike, sing, thin, jazz, which is a verb here, die. I'm just taking a little license with the jazz, but at the time, here's something that she says often that you can find, but I don't mind saying it here, is that she was a little bit worried about using the word jazz because it had this sexual connotation, you know, especially she's using it as a verb. So she was like, I don't know, I'm going to be reading this publicly all the time. I don't think she was thinking I'm going to be reading it publicly all the time, but she was a little hesitant about that because of what it meant at the time. Now it doesn't mean so much to us. Fantastic word is what it is right now. And fantastic music if you're like me, jazz lover. Okay, penultimate point. What happens when enjambment of the we's are removed? That's something that as a poetry writer, if that's you, you should ask. You should be asking, what happens when you know, why look at this? I mean, it's fun to look at this because we're nerds, right? Poetry nerds together. That's why we're looking at this. But what if we mixed it up? What if we changed it around? Like, why did she do that? That's how you can know why a writer did something and why it's powerful what they did. By just doing a little experiment, typing it out. I actually meant to type it out, didn't, so I don't have it here. You can do it on your own. Remove those we's at the end and put them at the beginning. And I have to say that it alters the way you would naturally read it, because you would just read it differently aloud. The music is altered, which is to say the jazz is gone because you don't have that we, you don't have that break, the staccato, you know, it doesn't have like a rhythm going on at all. Not at all, but it's weaker, I would say. That's a better way. And I felt, and now I'm regretting not typing it out because I want to show you. So definitely do it on your own at home. I would like you to know how the effect on the diction and the effect on the power of the persona is so weakened that it almost to me sounded like childishness instead of risky, almost adulthood. It did not sound cool. It sounded like pretend cool. It sounded like, we real cool, we left school, we lurk late, we strike straight, we sing sin, we thin gin, we jazz June, we die soon. It doesn't even sound terrible to die in that case. So that's the power of choices, particular choices that poets make. It's important what you're trying to convey. And she wanted to do these 7 young men justice, I believe, and convey them as they were conveyed to her, you know, and she wanted to do the audience justice. Look, this is what I saw. So she makes these choices for a particular purpose. It is not by accident. Even if it is subconscious, it's not by accident why it works. So she didn't want to portray them as childish, so she didn't even go there with her line breaks and getting rid of the enjambment and just having end stops, which is the reading it like that if you get rid of the we's the way they are. So last point. The poem becomes, I said childish, but also a weak confessional. That's what I also realized. Without the benefit of the lyricism, confessionals are fine, but a weak confessional, not good. And then on top of it, to have it weak lyrically is bleh, not good. Yeah, my real official word, bleh. Anyways, it's less artistic. Well, that's it. You can look at my Patreon page if you would like to see it looks backwards when I show this, the special find that I found in this Gwendolyn Brooks selected poems that I bought at a used bookstore. I love used bookstores. There's something very interesting in here. So if you want to know what that is, go to my Patreon page and you can see it. I'm posting it up there for free so everybody can see it. And then you can just take a look at some of the other free things there. Consider subscribing to the Patreon page. In any case, I definitely want folks to post in the chat if you have suggestions about any other poems I should talk about. If you like this video, I'm more than happy to make a similar one about any poem that is your favorite. I look forward to engaging you all again as together we help our poems become their best selves. Bye.